Thank you, Jade, for sharing your story with us. It's really nice to hear that there's hope there, that if a woman has made a decision for an abortion, that there's still possibility of reversing that, and wonderful to see you there with us, with your baby boy as well. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm here with 4 fellow wonderful Catholics who we're going to discuss the Catholic Church and the response to the abortion crisis. So I'm here with Father Sean, Sister Andrea, Father Dominic, and Bishop John, and thank you so much for joining us. So first I'm just going to outline a little bit about what the crisis actually is and what we're going to be discussing today. And last year abortion figures were at the highest that we've ever seen since the abortion law was enacted here in the UK. Over 200,000 children have been lost to abortion, which is a figure I just really struggle to comprehend. We've also been seeing since the lockdown, we've got pills by post or DIY abortions now happening, where women are able to phone up and be posted a pill to end the life of their child. And this is just increasing. I was speaking actually earlier today with leaders of pro-life organisations who've been saying the calls they've been getting from women in really desperate situations have been increasing, and having these pills just sat in their drawers thinking, you know, I don't know what to do, I don't really want to take it, but it's there, and I feel that I should. So huge pressures, and in the law as well, they're using the word of decriminalisation, which really just is, let's try and make the abortion law as liberal as possible and have abortion up to birth for any reason. So we really are sort of up against it, I think, and it seems to be getting worse and worse. So we're going to see what the Catholic Church is doing about that, and hopefully find some positive things as well. So to start us off, maybe Bishop, would you be able to outline for us a little bit about what the Church actually teaches on abortion and what we need to know as Catholics?
Sure, Madeline. So the Church really, the teaching of the Church on abortion is really in the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. And really, it's a life perspective, that human life is to be respected because it's sacred in itself. Also because we believe, even in terms of the natural law, we can understand that human life is in relation to God as its creator, and to God as its end. And so it's not lawful, according to the natural law, to take human life because of its inherent dignity in itself, but also we believe because of the holiness of God. It's wrong to take life because God is holy and God is the creator of that life. And then our teaching on abortion is within that. That is to say, it's wrong to take life directly by abortion or to cooperate in abortion, because the human person has to be respected in its absolute integrity. Now, what does that mean? Well, essentially that it's wrong to say it's possible to have a living human being that's not a person. As soon as you begin to do that, we've been down that road in human history. There's a living human being, but we will not accord it the identity of a person. So human life the person has to be respected with absolute integrity in its continuity. At the moment we have a living human being till we cease to have a living human being, we accord it the absolute dignity of a person, and therefore we say human life from conception, the right to life from conception, is a fundamental human right. Again, when we say fundamental human right, what we're saying is not just it's a right for that person, fundamental because it's constitutive of society. If society doesn't respect those rights, then society isn't firmly constituted. And if society takes away those rights or undermines those rights, sooner or later society itself will collapse.
Thank you. And I think there are many challenges in the Church today, in our modern culture, abortion obviously being one of them. And where do you think we need to place abortion in the Church, sort of priorities-wise, and tackle it? A fight for the mic, do we?
I think it just has to be it's just a major priority that people, the human person, is the church's just greatest treasure. We're made in the image and likeness of God. There can be nothing more important or more precious. And the tragedy is we're losing millions, we're losing entire populations of people. And all these babies who are lost, for all those babies who are lost, we're talking about mothers and fathers and grandparents and brothers and sisters of these children who are very, very many of them utterly devastated by that loss. So again, you've got an entire population of people who feel maybe far away from the church, because it's kind of, they don't know where to go, they don't feel they belong. There are so many people the church needs to bring back, and so if we make that a priority, if we really let people know there is mercy, life is good, give people a genuine alternative to abortion, number one, and really care and love for people who have experienced abortion, then they will come, they just need to come back. And the church of all institutions in the earth, has to be number one in making sure that happens.
I think I know what you mean by priority, but I think it's even more complicated than it being a priority, because it's, in a sense, if we don't respect the right to life, then we are incoherent. And so that everything is connected in that sense. So what does it say about us as a church? What does it say about us as a society? If the most vulnerable, the most defenseless members of our society are treated in this way, it's extremely important that we fight for other minority groups, but it's incoherent if we don't fight for this group. Because without the right to life, there are no other rights. St. Ambrose has a beautiful thing. He says you can see the whole of the church in the soul of one person. We're talking about someone in an abortion, not a something. Someone willed by God, created by God. To uphold human dignity in the abstract is meaningless if we don't uphold it in the concrete person of the child in the womb, I think.
I'd just like to add, I think it could be a tendency maybe to worry and think, oh, well, there's so many other problems within the church and in society as well. So is it right to treat this as really as a priority and to treat it as a number one issue? And I don't think we should worry about doing that. Jesus himself told us that what you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. And it's hard to think of anybody more innocent, more vulnerable than the unborn. And so when we're defending the unborn, we're defending our Lord himself through that person that we're defending. And just looking forward as well into the future, abortion, it's, without wanting to put too strong of a word on it, but it's anti-human. It goes against, as Bishop John said, it goes against who we are as human beings and the natural order of things. So we can guarantee that abortion isn't going to be something which is going to last forever as it is now, as something which is legal, which is accepted, which is almost celebrated. And so in the future, people will look back on abortion and think, how did we ever live in a society where that was the case? And they will look back and they will see that the Catholic Church, please God, they will look back and they will see that the Catholic Church treated this as a number one issue. That's a fantastic thing, a sign of hope for the future, that if we stand fast now as kind of prophets to this truth, then in the future, we'll probably be the only group that people will be able to point back and say, they stood up for the innocent when they needed it most.
Yeah, number one issue, I remember Cardinal Winning of very happy memory when he was being criticised, that people were saying, you're single issue, aren't you? And he said, abortion's not a single issue, it's a fundamental issue. It's not one of many issues. It's not the number one of 10 or 15 or 20 issues. It's the foundational issue, as Father Dominic was saying, because if we don't have the right to life, I mean, logically, how can you have another right without having the right to life? It's the foundational one. And then in terms of, knowing right from wrong, which is so important to humanity, so important to our society just now. Mother Teresa, I remember, I think we all know, she said, if abortion isn't wrong, nothing's wrong. And then in terms of its scope, its reach, she also said, you know, I remember being surprised to hear her say this a generation ago, but you can see more and more how prescient it was. She said, the greatest threat to world peace is abortion. So you look at it from all of those different dimensions. I think the church has, at least in principle, the sense that it is a priority issue. Whether we live up to acting as if it was, I think there still is something which is integral to our faith, that as a social justice issue, abortion is number one.
And do you think that has always been the case? Do you think so? As Cardinal Winning and Mother Teresa have seemed to be advocating for it and have done, but do you think there are a lot of other people like that? Do we have a long history of doing that, of keeping it as a priority? Or?
I mean, if you look at the teaching of the church, it's always been constant. Absolutely, yeah, it has never deviated from that. And I was thinking, as you were talking about the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe, you know, when Europeans begin to colonize the Americas, they discover a society in which child sacrifice is common. And this beautiful, miraculous apparition converts millions of people from that. Now, that to me is extremely indicative of the fact that any society that, in a sense, destroys its own children is not going to thrive. And so in these countries, in places where there is poverty, for example, the great pressure is the idea that some of this is an economic issue, and that we are liberating people by giving them abortion. You know, we know, unfortunately, that non-governmental organisations like the UN see this as something that liberates people, that's a right, that's promoting human development. Whereas actually the history of the missions is that it's the opposite, you know, that actually we free people, we empower people by giving them the desire and indeed necessarily the material means to keep their children. You know, and I think also in an age when the church is rightly looking at the environmental agenda and ecology, what kind of ecology is there if we don't afford the human person the same level of protection and love and care as we do other animal species? You know, if the destruction of forests is terrible, but the murder of millions and millions of children is a human right. Yeah. So, you know, I think along with proclaiming an ecological agenda, the church must reaffirm this truth, that there is no real human ecology unless the human person is safe from conception through to natural death. But I think there are perhaps people, you know, trying to sort of somehow push that to the margins, or to frankly blow the waters by saying, well, there are other issues. Yes, there are other issues. But this is a fundamental issue. It is the fundamental issue in terms of human ecology, I think.
I hope this isn't going too far off the point, but you mentioned about the church's views, attitudes, teachings in the past. And I think it's important to recognise that the moral principle which underpins the church's teaching on abortion is one that applies to all of humanity, that it's wrong to directly and intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. That's always been, that moral principle has always been the church's teaching, and it's actually not a controversial one. I don't think many people in today's society would disagree with it. What's actually changed in terms of abortion is that now, as a result of modern science, we know that human life begins from the moment of conception. This is something that people couldn't have known hundreds of years ago because they just didn't have the know-how, and there are all sorts of theories about when life began and stuff. So the church's clarity that from the moment of conception, it's wrong to end the pregnancy, therefore to kill to kill the unborn child, that's really a merging of our understanding as a result of science about the nature of the world around us, the human body, along with the moral principle, which has been a constant throughout. So this is a moral principle, which isn't controversial, meeting a scientific understanding of who we are as a human being. And that's something which has developed, which has changed over time in a good way.
And I think along with that teaching, as it were, you know, it's incumbent on all of us to say we have a very firm sense of this is a moral wrong, but that mustn't blind us, therefore, to the as it were, equal priority of saying, well, many people are trapped in this culture of death. Many people are pressured into abortion. Many people don't make this decision in full freedom. And so alongside this as our priority in terms of teaching must be the sense of compassion for people who have had abortions, for people who are caught up in the culture that says this is going to empower you, this is going to free you. And I think perhaps, you know, it's sometimes what people hear is the condemnation of the act, and what they need to hear from us in equal measure is the sense of, look, there is compassion for this. We understand that many, many people make this choice, not freely, not easily, because there are other circumstances dictating things. And so my hope is, as it were, that people hear that message loud and clear, that this is wrong, but that lots of other things are wrong, and we don't turn our back on people for that reason. You know, they need all the more our care and our support and our compassion in direct measure to the fact of the gravity of what's happened. So, you know, we need to proclaim the message firmly, but equally to show the compassion for people who are caught up in this culture of death.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's just good to remember that we're speaking on the back of over 50 years of legalised abortion in this country. That makes the pressure, you know, on a woman just absolutely unbelievable at times. And, you know, if you look back, when a woman discovered she was pregnant and abortion was not very prevalent, she would clearly be upset. There's nothing new about crisis pregnancy. They've been on the go for a very, very long time. And so the emphasis then was, okay, this is obviously a problem for you. Why is this a problem for you? What is your situation at home? How can we help you? You know, the emphasis was all on helping the mother have this child because she was already a mother and everybody knew that. Now the situation is so different and she's immediately forced into making a decision, you know, what are you going to do about it? And that is a pressure beyond words. And so now, because we've had legalised abortion for so long and it's wreaked such havoc, that tendency we've always had, and that teaching we've always had about the sanctity of human life and how we have to help mothers, we have to genuinely help people make the right decision. Alongside that, there has to be a wing. You cannot have just a one-sided approach anymore. A pro-life organisation, for me, has to have the crisis pregnancy element where we give women a genuine alternative, and the equally forceful message which says, and by the way, there is infinite mercy, there is help, there is healing. We understand, you know, why you did that, and we understand the pressures that you were put under. We understand the complexity of the human person and the pressures people are under. Come to us, you can talk to us. Because I think one of the biggest tragedies of the time we're living in, and this is probably going off message, is that those people who have experienced abortion really feel they have nowhere to go. And that's no good. People, if you ask anybody on the street, what does the Catholic Church teach about abortion? They'll say, oh, the Church is against abortion. They know that. They know that very clearly. What else do they know? Not very much about the Catholic Church. And so you have people who have experienced abortion who cannot go to society, very often can't go to their family and friends because they're all saying, it's okay, you did the right thing. You know, this is your human right, this is your freedom, this is good, this is empowering for women. they cannot go to church very often. They feel they can't. You know, in reality, we know they can, but they feel they cannot. They feel they walk into a church and the ceiling will collapse in on them, you know. And then they can't go to pro-life groups because, of course, pro-life groups are the very people who try to keep these babies alive. And look what they've done. So where do they go? We have to be so vociferous about this. We have to be really proactive, more than ever now, because they feel incredibly isolated. I think that's the worst thing. I think they opted for abortion because they felt isolated, and now they've taken that decision, or the decision was made for them. They have nowhere to go.
I think that's something I've really felt is actually the silence of the church is almost more damaging, because for exactly that reason they think that what they've done is so awful that actually the church doesn't even discuss it. So I think, yeah, I really resonated with what you were saying about walking into a church and just feeling like, you know, the ceiling was going to collapse. Yeah, Bishop John, sorry, you're going to say
just on the question about priority, you know, should it be a priority? Yes. Is it a priority for the church, honestly? Frankly, I think it probably is a question that Andrea has raised, and that Sister Andrea has raised, and I think that's probably right. It has always been a fundamental teaching, but really it's only since the late 20th century that the question of how much of a priority it's been has arisen with the passing of abortion acts and with the scale of abortion. So that perennial teaching of the church since the second half of the 20th century has become a priority with the passing of acts and the passing of court judgments. And my sense is, I'm just old enough to remember that in the early aftermath of the passing of the Abortion Act in the UK, it really was a priority for the church. I remember the mass lobbies, the rallies, Mother Teresa coming to Glasgow, Black Green, for a rally that I went along to. Thousands, a pro-life rally, thousands with their trains coming down to Westminster with bishops on them and priests on them. But that was because of the early days of the initial shock, and now we're habituated to it. And after 50 years of this onslaught, there's a kind of an abortion fatigue, I think. And so if you're to say, was it a priority 30 years ago in the church? Probably. Is it now? I'm not sure. We don't really hear, many people, lay faith will tell me, actually we don't really hear much about this in the church and homilies, and it's a difficult one for priests, isn't it? Because there is, we've mentioned before, the compassion conundrum. You know, that 30, 40 years ago, if I were a priest preaching about this, my assumption would be that not anyone in the congregation has had an abortion. Now, the assumption is that women there have had abortions, or families have had experienced abortions. So the compassion conundrum, how do I speak about something as a teaching which is touching such a raw nerve of my people? Then the kickback, sometimes the priest worried about speaking about this, will it create division in my parish? Then the baggage of that, the false claims that are made of pro-life people, that they're judgmental, that they're single issue, all of those kinds of things. So I think we've got to be honest and say, whereas we kind of know it should be a priority, there are obstacles to us making it a priority in the church today that we have to address and find a way through.
Can I just say on that very thing, I was speaking to a lady just the other day who is post-abortive, and she goes to Mass, and she says that any time the priest gives a kind of pro-life sermon or starts to talk about the sanctity of human life, and good on him for doing it because it doesn't come up very often, but every time he does, she zones out. You know, she's literally triggered, and she can't listen, which I totally understand, right? So in a sense you could say, well, it's not reaching her, or it's not helping her. But I've thought a lot about that since she said it, and I do wonder, and I wonder what you think. But for me then, I think the best way to deal with this is, because we're not talking about it, and that's no good. That complete silence is horrifying, because I can assure you they're sitting in the pew thinking they are the only person on the whole planet. Well, they know intellectually that lots of people have had abortion, but they themselves don't know a single other person. That makes you feel very, very lonely and very guilty, because you're the only one who's done the unforgivable thing. What if the priest, in the context of the mercy of God, purely in just the mercy of God, this is a sermon on the mercy of God, and you're saying to me, you're thinking, is there a single sin on the planet that is beyond the mercy of God? I'm telling you there is not. Let's name them. You know, let's name theft, adultery, whatever you want. Get abortion in there. Just say the word. Just say the word. But in the context of, listen, the precious blood of Christ covers every single bit of this. Just that. They don't even have time to get zoned out or triggered. It's just there. They've just said it. And if they keep saying it, repetition equals recognition equals reward, they might say to themselves, here, that priest at least is not going to drop dead when I mention the word, because he seems to be mentioning it quite a lot. And he will get flack. He will get flack. I get texts from people, because my number is in all sorts of places for Rachel's Vineyard retreats, and I get people saying, God forgive you for condoning this, just because I'm compassionate. And so we need to pray for these people. You know, we need to pray for them, but they'll get flack, but it's okay.
That means we're doing something right, I think.
Yeah, when you mentioned mercy, I was thinking, you know, a great example of how we need to change the narrative. When Pope Francis declared the Jubilee of Mercy, the Year of Mercy, BBC reported that the sin of abortion can now be forgiven by priests in confession. As though somehow, up to that point, it couldn't. Pope Francis had given priests the power to forgive the sin of abortion. As though until so if that level of misunderstanding is in our culture, and you know, some of that's our fault, some of that is precisely because this is what human nature does. It projects onto other people its own problems. So it's easier for me not to deal with my pain if it's all the fault of the terrible Catholic Church that's causing it, you know. So it's a very difficult balance, and we are going to, you know, trigger people if we preach about it. But I think by preaching in that context, in terms of the mercy, and saying, do you know what? We don't actually think of you as wicked, terrible people. We think of you actually as people who've been sold a lie, who are victims in many cases. And indeed, we know pastorally that many women who've had abortions have done so because they've had histories of trauma or hurt or harm or been treated very badly by men. So we need to have that compassionate voice.
Just a short one. I was only ordained as a priest last September, praise God, and so I've not had lots of chance to with preaching as much as others here. But Sister Andrea, I'd just like to say I'm definitely going to do that, and I'm going to do it soon. So thank you very much. Fantastic idea.
And I suppose it'd be nice to hear from all of you a sort of a personal anecdote, perhaps, if you have, of maybe where this has come up in your ministry, maybe where you've recognised that this is a number one issue, and how you've broached that, if you have.
I think of two women who stay with me, and one quite recently who just was apparently very successful, very together, and she just looked at me one moment and she said, actually, I think about it every single day. There isn't a day that goes by when it's not with me. I regret it every day of my life. And the other one was someone at the very end of her life who'd had a very troubled, difficult history, I think, but who was utterly convinced she was going to go to hell. There was no salvation for her because of that one thing that she'd done, because she'd taken the life of her child. And trying to get her to believe that God's mercy was bigger than all of that, that she would see the child in heaven, that the child was praying for her, you know. And she moved away. I don't know what happened, but I pray for every day, because what a hell is that, you know, to believe that you are beyond God's mercy. And that's what we've got to obviously somehow, you know, got to change that.
You mentioned about Rachel's Vineyard, and I was not too long ago went and participated in a Rachel's Vineyard retreat myself. So Rachel's Vineyard is for women who've, not just women or men, anybody who's been affected by abortion themselves, and they can go and participate in the Rachel's Vineyard retreat for healing. Obviously, I'm not going to say much about my experience there, but all I want to say is this. Although I knew it already on an academic level, I knew how traumatic abortion was academically to women. Seeing face to face the trauma that was caused by abortion opened my eyes anew in a real way that just, it wasn't the case before. And so anybody who, even if they think they're motivated to think, oh, well, you know, it's wrong, but we need to be so careful to not, you know, upset people or to make ourselves look silly, or there's more important things to deal with. Going there opened my eyes to the reality that this is a #1 priority issue for the unborn, and it is, but also for the women who suffer as a result of abortion. Because I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's horrible. It's really horrible.
I'm so pleased that you mentioned men as well, because we tend to sort of think of this, I easily think of it as a women's issue, but this is an issue for men too. Both in the sense that they experience terrible grief and loss if they know they fathered a child. Another rights issue, you know, very often they have no say in this. In other cases, they're actively promoting it. But what kind of society are we going to create if we give men the idea that somehow they're not responsible for the result of their own sexual behaviour, for their own behaviour in relationships? You know, one of the crises in our society is a crisis of fatherhood, of men actually taking responsibility. So actually one of the things that abortion does is allow men to be thoroughly responsible. It to objectify women. But yes, abortion hurts men terribly. I can think of one young man who, 3 or 4 years on, is heartbroken still at the thought that he lost a child because the mother of the child decided she simply didn't want it. She, as I understand it, is okay with that choice. He's heartbroken. It's completely affected his ability to enter into a relationship, I think, really, because he's been so hurt. So really important for us to keep that in mind as well, that it really hurts men and it damages fatherhood and encourages men to behave irresponsibly, I think.
For me, to answer your question, I think it's just countless women and men, but especially for me, I think a whole number of older women I've spoken with, I just can't bear it. You know, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they've lived their lives thinking they're going to hell, and they're now maybe afraid because death approaches. And I think of all the decades of their lives that they haven't lived as God intended them to. And that's no good, but what a privilege it is for us to be able to really, to give them hope at that last gasp. So that's one side of the thing, but the other thing that really puts fire in my belly is when I spoke, I give appeals, parish appeals about Rachel's Vineyard, just information appeals, and I couldn't believe it. A woman came up to me after an appeal in one of our cathedrals, one of our venerable cathedrals in Scotland, and said, I didn't know the church taught about that. And I literally chased her and said, sorry, taught what? And she said that about, you know, mercy for people who have had abortions. I think, how can you, now that may seem very extreme and you think, well, what on earth? But actually, there is truth in that, and that's no good. It's just no good. So so that's what gets me up in the morning, you know, that in terms of apostolate, in terms of the job, that's the job. We need to let people know.
I've got kind of a nice story about knowing its priority. Father Dominic, you've been into my office, and you might have noticed just outside there's this photograph of the most beautiful 18-month-old Nigerian ethnic little girl, and it says underneath is her name, God's blessing. And you know, no matter what's going wrong, if I get this problem, that problem, the other, I just see little God's blessing's face, and I'm immediately consoled and cheered up, because the story was 2 years prior, Claire McCullough from Good Counsel Network had contacted me because a woman, a midwife, had contacted her, and she said my daughter, who had MLD, mild learning difficulty, had become pregnant while back home in Nigeria, but was very happy about it and was looking forward to her child. But when she went to see the consultant, she and her daughter went to see the consultant, along with the consultant was social work. And they had explained that they were going to make her ward of court so that there could be an abortion, because she wasn't capable of looking after the child. Well, the grandmother then, so the mother of the pregnant woman, had been a midwife all of her life. And she said, I'm perfectly capable of looking after the little one, and I want to, and we've got everything in place, and my daughter's delighted to be having this child. And so Claire contacted me and contacted Bishop John Sherrington in England, and they asked me to put up a video about signing a petition for this the birth to take place. And Bishop Sherrington also wrote a letter, and both received kind of a bit of media publicity. Well, I don't know if it was because of that or not, but eventually she was allowed to give birth, and then 18 months, it was the most beautiful, beautiful little face looking at it. I have it because the grandmother, in her mind, was convinced it was our intervention that brought it. Whether it was or whether it wasn't, if it's a wet Monday morning in Scotland in November,
We never have them.
and the world's on top of me, I just look at that little face and I think, well, maybe I've done something worthwhile.
Beautiful. Nice to have a hopeful story as well. Yeah. Yeah, so moving more sort of practically then, what it sounds like we're in agreement that maybe the church should be doing more, and we've talked a little bit more about that, but practically, maybe especially for laity, what can we do to make this a number one issue and be more vocal, perhaps, if that's the solution in the church?
Yeah, I mean, what was that film that was out? We've got to talk about, what was it?
Oh, Kevin.
We've got to talk about Kevin, right? And then that became, as a church, we've got to talk about abortion. I think we've got to talk about it in the way that we've all agreed here, I think. I think the first thing we have to say is we've all got to talk about how this is a difficult issue for us as a church. We've got to talk about that with our priests, our people. We've got to say, we've got to talk about how this is difficult to talk about. Then I think we have to say, we've got to talk about how many women are hurting from this in our congregation. And why do they continue to hurt? For lots of reasons. But for one reason, because nobody's talking about it. And I know that you, Father Dominic, this is something that you're quite expert on. If you can't talk about something, you can't grieve it. If you can't grieve it, you can't be healed of it. So while we're all very afraid of talking about it, it's perpetuating the hurt. So I think we've got to then say, and what do we talk about, Sister Andrea? We talk about the mercy of God. The church is God's love in the world for all of us, because we've gone wrong. And the church is God's support for us when we've made mistakes. And then beyond that, the good news, it's not just love and support, it's healing. It has the means of healing. So if we can talk about it, we can heal this issue. And I think really, so we have to talk about abortion, we have to talk about God's mercy, we have to talk about so much hurt that's there, unspoken.
I just want to very quickly pick up on something you said, because I think it's so fundamental. Because anger is a stage of grief. So that whilst we think, oh, it's going to make people angry, so we can't talk about it, we actually have to stand in the face of that anger sometimes. Because anger is a way of grieving. And an angry woman is often propping up grief around this. So we still need to go to it with gentleness. And if someone is very angry because I've preached about abortion, I might just have to dare to say, gosh, you must be hurting very badly. Rather than saying, you don't have a right to be angry about this.
That's something I've really experienced, is if my message is met with anger, I actually see hurt, definitely. And
in the pro-life movement, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, the people screaming at pro-life demonstrations are hurting desperately.
I grabbed this, but now I can't really remember what I was going to say. No, that serves me right, doesn't it? I just went, what was it? But I think, to be fair to priests, you know, I know a lot of priests who really feel for this and who understand and who want to help, but don't have the confidence. You know, they're afraid too. They're afraid too because the abuse scandal has caused such an outrage, and you know, who are we to talk about these things? Because
just mere men.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So they don't want to speak, and then they're afraid of hurting people in their congregation whom they know have experienced abortion. But it's just so. What I think then we maybe need is some kind of education for priests, and I don't know how that would work. Whether you go around deaneries, groups, or however. I think smaller groups are better. Look, let's have this conversation. You know, because they will know people who have come to them for confession. Not that they would ever speak about anything. You know what I mean? But they have a good sounding of their parish and who has spoken to them about it and who hasn't. It's very important to speak to them about how to approach it. You know, they want to say something, but they don't know how. I think you said, Bishop John, 400 years ago, you can speak about anything in church as long as you speak about the mercy of God. If you mention it with the mercy of God, you can speak about anything. Do not be afraid of this. Do not be afraid of this. Because sometimes you get priests who are very zealous and they're really pro-life and all, and they say all the wrong things. And that's a thing. And you say, oh, man, you were so close, but so far. You know, because you've really hurt some people in your congregation, and I know you didn't mean that. But actually you did. And if we could just speak to them and say, look, here's the way, I think they would be amenable, you know.
And I think as priests we'd be overwhelmed by the scale of the problem.
Yeah.
So that one of the greatest gifts you can have as a priest is to refer people to someone as expert. So if there are ministries like Rachel's been in, if there are outreaches to women who are hurting after abortion, then that's a practical sign of compassion. I don't have to deal with it all and solve it in a sermon. I can just open up a space for conversation and a referral, maybe.
For fear of putting a downer on things towards the end of a good discussion, no, I just think looking forward as well. I think we also have to be honest about kind of the direction that our country's going in as well. It's not becoming a more tolerant country towards people who express a conviction with a prophetic voice about the truth of moral truths and the nature of the human person and those kinds of things. Anybody who thinks that we're becoming more tolerant really needs to, you know, wake up and open their eyes. So I say that in as far as we know, we also need to be honest that going forward, being pro-life is probably going to get more difficult to witness to that truth. Legislation, we already see it around buffer zones, but it's not going to stop with buffer zones. As soon as that's happened, people will start to look for the next step and the next step. And so we also need to wake up to that one. At the same time as recognizing that whilst that will be a reality and a good opportunity for us to become sanctified and holy, hopefully, but look forward to the future with hope as well, because abortion goes against who we are as people. It goes against the law written in our hearts by the Lord. And so we have hope because it won't last. The Lord's won the victory. And as we look forward, you know, his victory will win out in the end. But in the short term, it might not be easy for us.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, and I like to feel that maybe we've made one of those, that first step today, just through this discussion. Thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful, and we sort of concluded that actually we need to be breaking that silence and having that discussion, and by being here, I think we've started to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you to Bishop John Keenan for joining us, Father Dominic, Sister Andrea, and Father Sean as well. It's been lovely to have all of you with us today.